Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And in this video, I'd like to leave the Tories to decide whether they want to bring down their government for a few hours. Take a look at the consequences of the DUP bringing down theirs some time ago. Tomorrow, by all accounts, is going to see the mother of all strike action in Northern Ireland. And both the Tories and the DUP are trying to position themselves to put the other in the line of fire of it all. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So we've been used to major negotiations between unions and employers, as well as industrial action where those negotiations were either refused or failed to resolve issues, all over Britain for like best part of 2 years now. The public sector strikes in England have been particularly newsworthy because the Tories frequently refused to even negotiate. Besides, it suits the privately owned mainstream media to keep the focus on the public sector strikes. Oh, it wouldn't do to shine a spotlight on all the major successes unions have had with the private sector in eliciting fairly decent pay awards. The Tories are happy to highlight that wages have poked their head above inflation at least, but they don't want to explain why that was. Such negotiations have been less newsworthy in Scotland and Wales because ultimately the governments did negotiate there. But in Northern Ireland, there is no government to negotiate with. Like, public services are sort of running, but there's no leadership due to Stormont being unable to sit because the DUP are sulking about the consequences of their support for Brexit and their support for the Tories who delivered the particular form of it. And given that this period of Stormont mothballs has coincided with excessive inflation rates, it has particularly screwed over public sector workers, well, everywhere, particularly in Northern Ireland. The failure of the Tories and DUP to agree a return to power sharing is now resulting in a series of major strikes tomorrow. The estimate is that 170,000 workers will be on strike. Now, for context, this is 9% of the entire population of Northern Ireland. So yeah, this is a big strike. So big that it will mean more than just 170,000 people being off work tomorrow. Like, workers not striking, particularly in the private sector, will have to stay at home to look after the children or may not be able to use public transport needed to get to work. The actual absenteeism tomorrow, by all accounts, could be huge. Also, can't have escaped people's attention that it's a little bit cold. And we've got snow around lots of parts, including in Northern Ireland. I've seen reports of uncertainty about whether or not the gritters will even be out. Now, if not, then even private transport won't get some people to work. And the thing is, it's not even like you can go out in your car and just see and then turn back. You know, it might be that unless you are convinced that the roads are safe, you'll just have to say, look, I'm going to not be able to get in today. I mean, this is huge. It's like nothing we've been seeing on this side of the Irish Sea, where the strikes have been staggered across a long time. I mean, I've said myself, actually, wouldn't it have been more impactful to have had them all at the same time? In Northern Ireland, the different unions have coordinated their strikes. Now, being clear, it's not a general strike. That would be illegal. They've all got their own individual grievances, which are all basically pay related, of course, because there's no government to negotiate pay with. And although there are plenty of reports of this being a protest against the Westminster government, which would also be illegal, the strike is about pay. But the two things do go hand in hand because there can be no serious movement on pay without political leadership, and that political leadership can only come from one of two sources. The first is Stormont reconvening. Well, the DUP do not seem minded to do this without a major carrot or stick. What they want, of course, is for all the trade friction in the Irish Sea to go away, but this is not occurring. They've been offered a lot of money for the Northern Ireland budget to sort it out. In fact, proportionally so much that you can imagine the Welsh and Scottish parliaments might reasonably wonder, hang on, should we go on strike if we can get this money? The second option, of course, is direct rule. Now, this would mean the political leadership comes from London and Dublin. And if the Tories weren't so trapped by their own ridiculous ideology and culture wars, this second option would be a great stick to force the DUP to reopen Stormont. In fact, I'd have imagined it would have the Tories would have gone for it already. Because the DUP have got a very weird attitude to unionism. Like most people anywhere in the world, including Northern Ireland, can't be arsed with politics at all. They just want politicians to help them live a comfortable life. Can you run society, please? Thanks very much. So for unionism to succeed, people in Northern Ireland have to ideally feel that they are doing better as part of the UK than they would as part of United Ireland, or at least no worse off. because they'll sort of understand there'll be a lot of aggro with reunification. So it's like, can we at least be no worse off? But it is hard to find a metric which doesn't show that Northern Ireland is actually the most deprived part of the island of Ireland. And although you can understand the political advantage of Sinn Féin bringing Stormont down at certain times, the same is not true of the DUP. Like, you don't hear a great deal from Michelle O'Neill in the British news these days. You don't have to. The DUP are doing her job for her. Now, there is a sense in which the DUP don't like the idea of Stormont either, and are more than happy to see the Westminster government establish direct rule. In their ideal world, there is no devolution in Northern Ireland anyway. Except, thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, direct rule doesn't mean London taking over to fill the political vacuum alone. It means London and Dublin, the governments of both the UK and Ireland. This should be an obvious stick to beat the DUP with. And the Tory Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has been hinting that it could be coming. Imagine telling the people of Northern Ireland that a minister for Dublin will now be managing their education services, deciding education policy, and telling the people of Northern Ireland, oh yeah, this is because the DUP would prefer Dublin to decide these matters than for them to do so, because they could do so. All they have to do is walk up that hill to Stormont and that's it, it's fine. It should be a monumentally powerful negotiating tool for the Tories. The only problem is they don't want to use it because they're full of shit too. They no more want Dublin managing things in Northern Ireland, part of the UK, sovereignty and all that, than the DUP do. It's perhaps slightly less awkward for the Tories because it's not the sort of thing that's going to be widely reported in the British news, especially with all the material being provided by their own civil war. Another factor to consider is that if the strikes are unofficially, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, a protest at the Westminster government, it's probably misdirected. And I don't mean in terms of blaming the wrong people, though you could make a case for that as well. I mean, why would the Tories care? Think about the situation from the point of view of the Conservatives. Although the party are, in theory, pro-union, they are the Conservative and Unionist party. Many of the people in charge are actually anti-union. Scotland being part of the UK makes it harder for the Tories to win elections because they can't get anywhere near half of all the Scottish seats. So they'd have a much easier time winning elections if Scotland weren't part of the UK. Way better if Scotland were independent for them. And in Northern Ireland, the Tories don't even compete for seats. So it's of no help to them at all, but it's of no hindrance unless, of course, they keep causing them problems. And Northern Ireland are causing an awful lot of problems with their precious Brexit. Ideally, for many pragmatic Conservatives, they would love it if both Northern Ireland and Scotland left the UK. They just don't want to be held responsible for it happening. Because there are an awful lot of Conservatives who are genuinely pro-UK as it exists now. The point I'm making is it's not immediately obvious how strikes in Northern Ireland, even on this scale, gets the Conservatives to really care very much. They were happy, for example, to see prolonged strikes in areas where they are actually trying to win elections, where they have voters. The Conservatives have no voters in Northern Ireland. So there are only two possible reasons why they would act in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. One is a sense of duty, and two is a sense of human compassion. Oh dear. And although the DUP do have voters in Northern Ireland, a lot of them seem happy with the situation somehow. The irony is that the DUP are happy to sit it out and wait for a Labour government. Now that sounds mad because it's like, well, hang on a minute. They don't see eye to eye with Labour on very much, if anything. But the sticking point here is that trade friction between Northern Ireland and Britain, and Labour want to scale it back. So even though that means close agreements with the evil papist EU, it removes what the DUP see as a wedge between Britain and Northern Ireland, which does not exist between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland. And that's why if the Conservatives want to break this deadlock themselves, rather than see a Labour government doing so, you feel they are going to have to resolve themselves to direct rule and actively use Dublin as leverage, not just go, oh, well, we'll try and give Dublin the minimum amount of input that the Good Friday Agreement sort of technically allows. No, actually use them. Use them. Say to the DUP, right, they're going to be in charge of health, transport, education. Oh, yeah, you seem to have particular issues about education policy. Yeah, they're going to decide that. Let them. Let's say Dublin. Actually, we've got our own troubles over here. We've got an election this year. And these terribly nice people in Dublin have said that they're happy to shoulder the main burden of policy making. So we're happy for that to happen. Be hugely powerful. And oh, you don't like it? That's not a problem. Form the Stormont executive. Hugely powerful. And yet the Tories don't want to do that either. But there we are. That's the mess we're in. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.